Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I am your host, Ashley Buckner. Before we get started, here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. I am a licensed therapist, but unless you have a signed consent form with me, I am not your therapist. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, and they adjust to remain connected to the sun. Metaphorically, I define these sunflower movements as experiences with people, places, and moments where we feel seen, heard, and believed. This is Sunflower Movement, a community where people are able to show up authentically. Additionally, this podcast is an opportunity to ask, tell, and share anything with me, a licensed therapist and trauma specialist. Together, I, along with my guests, will explore a variety of personal stories about mental health, trauma, religious trauma, relationships, nervous system regulation, spirituality, and all that the healing process encompasses. The link to submit and ask, tell, share anything with me anonymously will be included in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in. I am so excited to have this podcast and to have you here with me. If you want to learn more about what inspired Sunflower Movement, please tune into the first episode where I really just dive in to the meaning behind the name and the experiences that led me here to this place, to this platform. I am a certified Brainspotting practitioner, and we are going to dive into what that means today. I became certified in Brainspotting in 2023. I was first trained in 2022 and completed subsequent training, consultation, a number of hours working with clients to then be qualified to be certified. I have continued my certification process with ongoing consultation and training, and I'm hoping eventually to become a Brainspotting consultant in a couple years once I meet those requirements, and potentially a trainer in the future. You never know what the future holds. So I am passionate about Brainspotting. Brainspotting has changed my life on a personal level. It has changed my life as a therapist and the way I work with clients and just conceptualize cases in the world. And it's a vital part of Sunflower Movement. So I actually love the definition that I've created for Sunflower Movement because it's essentially the definition of Brainspotting and Brainspotting therapy. When I do Brainspotting sessions with clients, I sit with them in these moments that sometimes are so dark and so scary and so heavy. And I just sit with them and I see them and I hear them and I believe them and I witness them. And I genuinely believe people get to show up authentically in these Brainspotting sessions. And I know that's my experience personally for all my personal work in Brainspotting sessions. I've always been able to just be with the parts of myself that are hard to be with and show up authentically. So again, Brainspotting is just, it's my love, my therapy love. And it's just such a beautiful healing approach that I'm super excited to talk more about today because it is honestly what inspired and created this entire movement and podcast and community that I've built on social media now here on this platform. So I've talked a little bit about my certification. Like I said, I was trained in 2022, and that was in March of 2022. And then in May of 2022, I decided to open a therapy practice in Cedar City, Utah. Prior to that, I had obviously been working as a therapist for a decade. I'd been working in various settings. I talk a little bit about that on my first podcast. I was seeing virtual clients at the time that I got trained in Brainspotting, which is what's really cool about Brainspotting is it can be done virtually online. So I have a lot of clients that I see in California virtually, a lot of clients throughout Utah that I'm seeing virtually, and Brainspotting can be accessed in that way, which I think is just such a cool part of the method. Then I decided to open a therapy practice in Cedar City, Utah. I was kind of on the fence with it. I will be really honest, prior to Brainspotting training, I was a bit burnt out in my field. I think talk therapy is wonderful and it has a lot of limitations. And I had been a talk therapist for, like I said, a decade prior to starting Brainspotting, and it was holding me back in just the work that I was seeing happening within myself, but also in the work that I was witnessing and experiencing with my clients. So that led to me getting trained in Brainspotting. So what is Brainspotting? I'm sure that's like the burning question. What does that even mean when I say that? It's a complex answer, and I'm going to be straight up with you. The best way I can explain brain spotting is for you to experience brain spotting yourself, which I know that's not super realistic. Here's what I want to say. So, brain spotting is the idea that where we look affects how we feel. And it was created by Dr. David Grand, and he was doing EMDR therapy. If you don't know what EMDR therapy is, I will put that in the show notes for you to do your own research on, because I'm not an EMDR therapist. I'm a brain spotting therapist. Anyways, he was doing EMDR. He noticed that in a certain eye position, there was a little movement in the eye, and he decided to hold his fingers there in front of the eye, and then just this deep level of processing ensued for this particular client within their nervous system, and brain spotting was born. So again, it's the idea of where you look affects how you feel. And we use the eyes because your eyes are a direct link to your nervous system. By holding a fixed eye position, we're able to access your precortical brain where all your trauma is stored. And again, trauma is just the best word that we have to describe this, right? It's just basically the part of your brain where all the distressing, dysregulating life experiences are stored in your nervous system. And brain spotting allows us to get direct access to that part of the brain. There's lots of different ways to do a brain spotting session. There's lots of different approaches and methods, and I'm not going to get into all of that today, because I think what's more importantly is just talking about the impact of brain spotting and applying it to a couple questions that I have from the audience, and talking about it in that way. I will say though that brain spotting therapy is very versatile, and it can work with anything you want to brain spot, you could brain spot. So you can brain spot serious trauma, depression, anxiety, rumination, worthiness issues. And you can also target anything you want to expand on, anything you want to see more possibilities with. So whether that be creativity, sports performance, you name it, you can brain spot it, which I also love so much. It's just such a cool way of working with the nervous system to show the vast possibilities in healing and growth and expansion. I'm going to introduce a quick exercise just to kind of get you into how brain spotting works with the nervous system. So I want you to take a moment, and I want you to think about something that has recently caused distress for you in your life. So something that could be anything, something maybe you're feeling sad about, something you're feeling a little anxious about. And I just want you to notice those feelings and notice where you're experiencing them in your body. Whether that be in your chest, your hands, your stomach, just notice where you're feeling that anxiety. And then you're going to glance to the right and look over to the right and hold a fixed eye position just at eye level. Notice how it feels when you look over there. And then you're going to come back to center, look in center, notice how it feels in there. And then you're going to go out to the left and just notice how your body feels as you look out to the left. Good. Now you're going to evaluate of those 3 spots, where did the activation in your body feel the most intense? And essentially, we could do a number of things. We could have you hold your eyes in that fixed place where it felt the most intense and invite you into processing, and you can process and explore, and your activation might get even higher, right? Because we're on the most activating point. Or I could set you up on a resource spot, maybe the spot where you felt the least, or maybe a place in your body that feels the most calm and grounded, and where do your eyes feel the most calm and grounded, right? And we can process from there and explore activation kind of in a more supportive, resourced way. So brain spotting is very versatile. And again, it works directly with the nervous system. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about brain spotting therapy is because it is something I do personally, and I was doing it personally before I was ever trained in brain spotting. One of my close friends, who's also a therapist, had done brain spotting training, and she told me, "You got to check this out, Ash. You gotta look into this." And so when I was searching for a new therapist, I looked for a therapist that was doing a body-based approach. And body-based approach just means EMDR, brain spotting, somatic experiencing, IFS, neurofeedback. I mean, there's lots of body-based approaches out there. I just didn't want to do traditional talk therapy. I wanted something that worked directly with my body, directly with my nervous system. And so I started doing my own brain spotting sessions. And just how the universe works, sometimes I had the opportunity to do a brain spotting training at a place I used to work. And I fell in love. I was like, this is incredible. I already knew it was incredible for myself on a personal healing level, and I couldn't wait to bring it back to my clients. And what's so cool about brain spotting is when you do the training, you actually do practicums where you practice brain spotting with people in the training. So you get a full feel of what this method is about. And then right after your first training, you get to bring it back to your practice or whatever space you're seeing clients and start to introduce it to your clients. Had never attended a training before that my clients could easily access the skill set that I had just learned. And that was so cool for me to be able to go right back to my virtual sessions the week after my training and start brain spotting my clients. And again, it's what inspired me to open a practice here in Cedar City, Utah, which then led to where I'm at today. I have brain spotted so many things that I can't even remember everything that I've uncovered and unpacked in my own nervous system work. I've been doing I meet with my therapist probably every other week, and I've been doing that since 2022. So I've unpacked and uncovered a lot of things within my own being. And I will say that brain spotting therapy changed my life because I started to feel nervous system regulation. I went from a place of being in a lot of dysregulation and having a ton of coping skills to manage that dysregulation. But it was just putting the Band-Aid on, right? Like I am an advocate for talk therapy. I was a talk therapist for 10 years. And I also think there's just so many Band-Aids that happen in talk therapy approaches because we don't ever get to the root causes or the root issues that are happening within our own being. And that was definitely my own experience on a personal level. When I started doing brain spotting therapy, I started to notice that I was more present. I could show up differently in my relationships. I felt better within my own body and within my own being. And that has been what's so cool about it. So when I work with people's nervous system, I essentially watch people relive whatever it is that they've gone through in their life. And that does sound as heavy as it is. And it is heavy. It is a heavy approach. And it is also one of the most powerful, moving, healing approaches I have ever witnessed. I've had the great fortune of witnessing my brain spotting trainers brain spot people and watching brain spotting sessions. I've had the opportunity to have done my own brain spotting sessions, and then I have the privilege to do brain spotting sessions with people. And the work that happens in those sessions literally gives me full body chills. I have them right now just talking about them with you. So what does this mean and what does this look like? I would have a client come in and they would pick a particular issue that they want to focus on. Like I said, anything. I'm just going to do like anxiety. I'm just going to, for the sake of an example, I'm going to give the example of anxiety. I feel like a lot of people have anxiety these days. I mean, how could you not in the world we live in? So they come in and they're like, I just feel really anxious whenever I'm in this particular situation and I don't know what to do about it. So, okay. When we set up an eye position, right? The eye position I walked you through we're going to set up an eye position where that feels the most intense and see what happens. So I invite people to be curious and open and to tune into their body and to their physical sensations. And what happens is the nervous system takes us directly where we need to go. So I'm not doing anything but holding space. Like I literally am just letting people's body guide me to the difficulties, the distress in their life that has caused them to feel this presenting anxiety. And it's just such a cool process because I get out of the way and I let my clients guide me through the session. And I love doing it for this reason because the clients are the experts essentially. And obviously my role is to hold space and to attune to them and to be present. But their body and brain have just everything within them already that they need to heal. And so brain spotting essentially allows us to access that. There's probably a million questions coming up for you around this, and I totally get that. I think that's fair. I will link Dr. David Grand's book in the show notes for you to go and read. And I also think it's just kind of one of those things in order to understand it. Sometimes you have to experience it. I wanted to talk a little bit about brain spotting because it is, again, how I approach my cases and kind of how I just see the world. And it's allowed me to be very curious and very open to a lot of different things. Um, so when I opened this practice in Southern Utah, I started to notice and witness the incredible amounts of religious trauma that was existing in people's nervous system from the Mormon church. And it just continued to come up over and over again, right? So I've already given you the backstory of how we set up a brain spotting session, and I'm following people's nervous system. And then their nervous system just kept going to this Mormon religious trauma, and all of this stuff associated with it started to come out. And I would just hold space for it and provide support, help people work to release it. That's what's really powerful with brain spotting is they like encounter it and then they start to release it from their nervous system through various ways of like whether that be physical sensations, whether that be just riding the wave of activation because waves always crash. And what happens a lot of times is when we're in a traumatic, distressing situation, we stop the wave because the wave is too intense. So we do something to shut it down, whether we disassociate, we numb, we write, will we disassociate, we numb, we'll engage in fight and flight, whatever we can to not have to feel the activation. And those are all very protective in nature. But the problem is a lot of times that keeps us stuck in our cycle. And then we just continue to feel that activation over and over again. So brain spotting essentially allows the activation wave to come up and get really, really big and then come down and allows us to feel more regulation to whatever's causing us distress. So again, watching just religious trauma come up over and over and over again. And what I started to also notice is that there wasn't very many spaces that were talking about it. I mean, obviously the post-Mormon space on social media does talk about like harm from Mormon church and you're allowed to be outspoken, right? But other than that, there's not any, there was not a lot happening in the therapy field in regards to, just Mormon religious trauma and talking about it openly, and no one was allowed to talk about it. And I thought that was extremely concerning because how do we address something if we can't first acknowledge that it's a problem? So the beginning of my career, I worked with adolescents in San Diego, and I've talked a little bit about this on my social media platform, but I worked with a lot of trauma, high levels of trauma. I worked with gang members, violence, substance abuse, absent parents. I mean, just, like at-risk youth and all that comes with at-risk youth. And it was so interesting because I started to think about like the mental health of these teenagers that I worked with in San Diego and the mental health of this small community in Utah. And I was like, why were these teenagers higher functioning than like small town Utah? That should not be happening, based on like a trauma lens and understanding like, access to healthcare, access to support. I mean, just like Cedar City is a much safer place to live than inner city San Diego, all of these things. So why is mental health so severe? And I started to realize it's because no one can talk about the thing that causes them harm. So no one can say, hey, like, I think Mormonism is really harmful. But it is, and it does cause trauma and it does cause pain. And so I started to really notice that no one was talking about it. And I thought, this is interesting. Because all of those kids that I worked with in San Diego, they could come and say, like, yeah, I'm in a gang, or, oh, my friend's dealing drugs, or I witnessed this like violent thing that happened. All of those were socially acceptable to talk about and get help for. But here in Utah, it's not socially acceptable to say, like, the Mormon church has really negatively impacted my life. If you say that, I mean, go look at some of my social media comments, you guys. I'm talking about this openly. And if you say that, people get pissed off. They don't want to hear it. And that's rooted in its own trauma in and of itself, which I will unpack in future episodes. But I think for me, not talking about the things that cause us pain, cause us trauma, and not being able to openly share that is so much a part of the problem. And why I started talking about this, I was literally witnessing almost every single week someone going through it, right? Like someone going through Mormon religious trauma that was coming up their nervous system. And I feel like they're obviously getting help with me, right? They're doing brain spotting sessions and they're releasing the trauma. And I think that's incredible. And also, what about all the other people? what about everyone else who's impacted by this religion that we're not allowed to talk about being harmful? And that's how I found my voice. So Brainspotting led me here to this community. And Brainspotting it has helped me heal. I mean, I have my own religious trauma in my being, and the shifts and the movements that I've made from doing Brainspotting therapy have been so incredibly transformative. I can't even begin to tell you the things that I've witnessed and understood within my own being based on religious doctrine and religious programming that occurred at a very young age shifted everything for me. There's very key things that we can do to heal and to work through things that are painful and hard, and Brainspotting being one of them. I mean, this is not the only approach out there. There's so many body-based approaches out there, which I also shared earlier, that I would invite you to tune into. And it doesn't even have to be therapy. I mean, I think yoga practice is incredible. I think meditation has a lot of powerful elements to it. Spirituality and figuring out what spirituality looks like. I specialize in Brainspotting. That's my specialty. That's my expertise. I have seen incredible results for clients. I've seen incredible results for myself. So that is kind of my background and expertise I'll be bringing to Sunflower Movement. I also believe that in order for things to heal, they have to move. And movement can be like actually physical movement. Movement can be, just in our brain and body. And for me, Brainspotting really embodies that. We're moving activation. We're getting, you have an activation level of a 10, and I'm hoping to get you down to a 0. So there is movement happening. And that's how we heal, right? We don't heal if we're stagnant, if we're staying in the same place. So Brainspotting therapy in a nutshell. Lots more to share on this. And I want to get into a couple questions from the community, kind of talk about how I would approach their cases in a Brainspotting frame and a Brainspotting lens. So I'm going to jump to those now, but please send me a question if you have one about Brainspotting, if you want to learn more. Again, I'll put a bunch of stuff in the show notes. But I'm really excited. I'm excited about Brainspotting therapy and just being able to share more about it. Now that we've kind of dove into Brainspotting and Brainspotting therapy, I wanted to respond to a couple questions that I received from the community and just kind of talk about why I think Brainspotting would be the proper approach to these. So this first question or share, my dad telling me when I left the church that he would rather lose a son in death than have a son that fell away from the church. This has been in my head daily for years, to the point I almost ended it and gave him his wish. This was quite a few years ago. That will live in my head forever. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge this person and just the heaviness of that situation. I think that it makes sense that you would get to this place in your life where you're thinking about, not wanting to be here when you have a parent that essentially says the same thing to you, and it's hard to not go there. It's really heavy, and it's an adaptation of our nervous system to think about not wanting to be here anymore. So I just want to say that, and that's how I view that in my practice and people I work with. It's, the escape of the activation that's so intense. I think that because this is so significant, and you said that will live in my head forever, this is something I would absolutely want to address in a Brainspotting session. Because it's having such a hold on you and a hold in your nervous system. And by doing a Brainspotting session around it, we would go into it, and it would be painful. It would be painful to remember this interaction with your dad. And it would also probably bring up some other things and some other traumas and some additional distress that is happening in your brain and body, and also an opportunity to release them from your nervous system so that it didn't have such a hold on you, and that you could think about this interaction with your dad and it would still be sad, right? Because it's always going to be sad that a parent would say this to you, but that you could feel less dysregulated around it, that you could see it for what it is. I think that's what Brainspotting really gives us the ability to do. It gives us the ability to dive into our nervous system and understand some of the things that have happened, and why they exist and they cause the pain that we have done. And I think it also helps us understand the people that have hurt us and caused us pain and distress in our life. And not because there's any justification for what your dad said, because there's not. And I also look at your dad from a trauma lens as someone who was programmed and indoctrinated to believe in Mormonism, so much so that he can't even reconcile that his own son would choose to leave the church. And so he'd prefer to wish him dead than for him to leave the church. And for your dad, like that makes more sense and is easier to tune into because the programming and indoctrination around Mormonism says that the only way to be with your family forever is to believe in the church. And so how do we reconcile that? We make sure that that's what our kids do, to the point where we would say something this horrific, right? And this traumatizing. So not, again, to justify what your dad said, but I think brain spotting really allows you to understand how religious trauma takes hold of the nervous system. And that's, for me, like that's what I see. And when I get the members of the church commenting on my posts and saying atrocious things that are not okay, I also see their pain and their wounds, and how much religious programming and indoctrination is in their being. And that's what I see for your dad. And I think you have to feel your feelings around that, and you have to process it and give yourself permission to feel angry and sad and all of it, right? And then that's how you get to a place that you get to work through the pain that happened with your dad, and maybe even potentially have some compassion for him in the future, right? And that's the gift of brain spotting, in my opinion. So definitely want to do a brain spotting session if this was a client of mine. Next question. What have you found to be the most impactful way of healing / correcting the toxic view of women and their roles within the church culture? I know you guys already know what I'm going to say. Brain spotting therapy. For myself personally, brain spotting therapy has transformed my views of myself as a woman, has shifted my sexuality, the way I feel in my body, the way I connect with my husband, the way I show up in the world and have my voice. I mean, pre-brain spotting, I would not be doing this podcast. I was way too insecure. I was way too worried what everyone thought about me. So much of that is due to the religious upbringing in which I had, right? And how women are positioned in the church. I think for me, brain spotting allows us to reclaim ourselves, and the parts of ourselves that have been, adapted to the trauma and the pain that's happened in our life. Those shifts happen for a reason, and brain spotting essentially allows us to create different shifts and get movement back towards ourselves and feel comfortable in our own skin and let go of some of the programming and indoctrination that come with being born into a high control religion or come from any trauma we may endure. I would say I work with so many women in brain spotting sessions on just their role as women and being able to unpack that in a brain spotting session, right? To unpack the role of what it means to be a mother and how that's showing up in the brain and body and how that's impacting decisions to have kids or not have kids. I've seen a lot of shifts for women in that regard, and it's been really cool to hold space for that. It's been cool to watch women feel empowered in their own body and their own sexuality and to stand up for themselves. I have so many clients that are like, oh my gosh, after doing all this brain spotting work, I've been able to go and stand up for myself and say, yeah, I'm not okay with that. Or no, you don't have power over me. I think that there's a lot of internalized patriarchy within us as women. I think a lot of women are almost worse perpetrators of the patriarchy within Mormonism because that's an act of survival for them. They're growing up this really oppressive culture. And so how do they deal with that oppression? They conform, they be a part of it, they become a part of it in order to survive. And it's actually very adaptive. It's very adaptive if you think about it in that regard. Like, oh, I'm a part of this oppressive system, so then I'm going to start behaving like the system so that the men, right, put me with them, right? And I think so many women have to unpack that post high control religion of how that is just literally in your nervous system. And I would say that requires a brain and body approach, whether that be brain spotting, EMDR, somatic experiencing. I mean, I really think reclaiming our power is understanding the toll it's taken on our nervous system, and a nervous system approach is so effective in working through that. Thank you for sharing and for asking that question. I could go on and on and on and on about Brainspotting and the healing power of Brainspotting. I also don't have the capacity to take on everyone listening as a Brainspotting client, so I'm going to include in the show notes my favorite resources for finding a Brainspotting practitioner. One being psychologytoday.com. You actually can just search Brainspotting as a specialty, Brainspotting therapist in Utah or California or wherever you're tuning into this podcast from, and it can help you find a Brainspotting practitioner. I love psychologytoday.com because all therapists have to pay to advertise on this platform, and it's very helpful because you're going to get therapists who are invested in their advertisements, and most of them will take a free consult call. You also can check out brainspotting.com, and they have a list of certified practitioners. So if that's something you're interested, I really encourage you to dive in and to explore it. I think it's a great healing tool. It's a great healing tool to work through religious trauma. Definitely to talk about it more as this podcast continues, and I'll share more personal stories of my own Brainspotting sessions and all the things. But I just wanted to give you guys an intro today and talk more about that. And I look forward to diving in. And please, I will include the link for questions. Submit them. I want to hear from you. I want to know what you want to talk about. What do you want to hear? And just thank you for being a part of this healing community. I think it's powerful to have stories be shared and seen and witnessed. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I look forward to tuning in next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If today's content resonated with you, please share, leave a review, all the things. It would mean so much to me. If you are interested in being a guest on Sunflower Movement, there will be a link in the show notes to submit an application. If your submissions align with the vision of Sunflower Movement, I will connect to set up a time for you to be a guest on the podcast. Disclaimer, coming on this podcast as a guest will be for entertainment and education purposes only. It will not be a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Thank you so much again for tuning in and being a part of the Sunflower Movement community.